Hey everyone, this is Andy Melbuff, and in this video we're going to explore using the Desmos Graphing Calculator for first-time users, both students and teachers. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, to access the Desmos Graphing Calculator and other calculators in any web browser, you want to go to desmos.com. That's the URL for Desmos calculators. Once you are there, you're going to want to log in. Well, if you're a new user to Desmos, you probably don't have an account yet. So to get an account, you'll have an option when you click in log in here. I'm going to sign in because I already have an account, but you'll have an option to create your own account. If you have your own account, any graphs that you want to save can be saved. Any tasks that you give students can be saved. So you'll want to be able to have that account. It's free and it's going to be very beneficial down the road. So after signing in, you'll see your name here. Now once you're signed in, I want to just explore some of these sub-menus here quickly. You have math tools available. Classroom refers to Desmos activities. We're not going to explore that in this video, but Desmos has an activity platform you can use with your students, and you can also access resources here if you want to look at any of those later. We're going to focus now on math tools, and you can see various calculators available to you there. And again, we're just going to focus on the graphing calculator. So I could tag graphing calculator up here, or I can simply hit graphing calculator here as well. And again, your name will appear here if you're signed in. If you see a little tab up here that says create account or log in, you want to do that. That's basically going to give you the ability to save. So what we have here are two parts to this. Over on the left, where my cursor is now, that's called an expression box. And that's box number 1. You can barely see the numbering on the left. If I hit enter several times, I can create additional boxes. So I'm in box number 6 right now in the expression list. And over on the right is the graph canvas. This is where if you type in equations or ordered pairs or polygons, you'll see them graphed here dynamically. I'm going to go up to box number 1 in the expression list. And I want you to see that this serves also as a regular calculator. It doesn't just graph. So if I were to type in a very simple expression like 2 plus 3, you can see it evaluate it here on the right hand side. And Desmos also will recognize order of operations. So I could put parentheses here, 4 minus 1, close my parentheses, and I can add exponents. And I added my exponent using a keyboard shortcut. Most students and teachers in the digital world we live in now are familiar with how to get an exponent, but I use Shift 6, which is the caret key, and that moves my cursor up into an exponent position. And you can see here this evaluates as I'm typing. So this expression evaluates to 29. Now, if you aren't familiar with keyboard shortcuts, you can always access them down here in the lower left corner. There's a show keyboard sign. You can open up this menu and you can see various features to use here. Here's how you can square something. Here's how you can get an exponent to a different power. You can explore different functions. All of those will be available to you. So I'm going to close that keyboard. And we're going to go ahead and move forward. Putting my cursor in box number 2, we can also evaluate things that are a little less convenient, like fractions. Desmos recognizes fraction notation, so I'm going to type in the fraction 2. I use a divide sign, and Desmos recognizes I want a fraction. I can put a 3 there, and this is the decimal evaluation of that. I can use this button right here to click on it and convert to fraction format. So where I might want to use that is if I'm adding together fractions. So I'm going to add 3 plus 4 to my 2/3. Here's the decimal equivalent. Here's the fraction. And you can see that it has that common denominator in it. So fraction operations are handled pretty easily with Desmos as well. In box number 3, for students in high school, when you get to trigonometry, sometimes you'll have to evaluate things like the sine of an angle. So here's a pretty common one to evaluate the sine of 30 degrees. Well, when I type in sine 30, it evaluates to this. Well, we're expecting to see 1/2 or 0.5. That's because the default measure for angles in the Desmos calculator is radians. No worries, we can convert or just change formats. So follow my cursor to the upper right, and here we have this little wrench symbol, and you can see it says graph settings. If I click on graph settings, you'll see some options available to us. We'll explore some of these in a minute, but at the very bottom, I can change to degrees, and instantly on the left side, my sine of 30 becomes 0.5. Clicking this button changes it to a fraction, so I can go back and forth between fraction and decimal formats. Now, besides evaluating expressions, as we just did here in these first 3 boxes, I can also graph things. If I want to remove something that I've evaluated, I can put my cursor in the box and simply backspace, or I can use this X key. So I'm going to use the X key to delete these. So now I have nothing in my expression list. I'm going to close my keyboard here at the bottom, and I can graph things such as ordered pairs if I use parentheses. So as soon as I type in 3, 4 in parentheses, you'll see this symbol right here, this circle with a small circle in the center indicating I have a point, and that point is plotted over here. Now on this canvas, you can click on this point and you can see the X and Y coordinates of that point. Clicking on it again makes that disappear. With this ordered pair, I can add a label by checking this box, and then the ordered pair will remain visible. I can add additional ordered pairs by separating with a comma. So now I have 2 ordered pairs showing. The label box is checked, so both of them receive labels, and I can add several more. So I'm creating here several points on my canvas that basically look linear to me. So I can also graph equations of things like lines. So noting that I have that particular arrangement set up, I can start an equation by typing y equals x plus 1. And you can see that this graphs, and this is a different notation here. This notation now looks like a sine wave, but it's really just the indicator. We're graphing an equation. And you can see my equation goes through the 4 ordered pairs I'd graphed above. Also, when I added additional ordered pairs up here, my symbol on the left, the purple circle, now contains several ordered pairs. That's just the symbol you see with multiple points being plotted. And I have some configuration changes. I can have some visual changes I want to display on my graph. I'm going to first click right here on my purple circle. I'm going to give it a quick click. That turns off my points. Now my labels are still showing. If I don't want them to show, I can uncheck label. I can click on this circle to have my points appear again and my labels appear again as well. And I can turn on and off anything I have here. So this is useful for teachers if you are looking to ask students, what do you notice about these points, etc., etc. Now turning them back on, I also can hold my cursor down on one of these circles. When I hold it down for a couple of seconds, I get some style options to appear. First of all, right here, I'm hovering over these. Most equations are graphed, all equations are graphed as solid lines, but you can change them to dashed or dotted to fit your needs. And you can also change the opacity of the line. The default is 0.9. 1 is the highest you can get. Watch what happens if I go to 0.7. my line gets a little faded. If I take it down to 0.4, it's faded even more. And 0.1 means it's barely showing. So if you want things to kind of be in the background, you can do that. You can change the opacity. You can also change the thickness. The default comes in as 2.5, but if I increase it to 4, my line gets thicker. And if I increase it to, excuse me, to 10, so you have some style options to play with here. You can also change the color by clicking on any of these default colors. And I'm sure students will want to play around with this and create some really thick lines, etc., etc. So there's some cool things you can do with changing that particular format. I'm going to put this back at, say, 5, so it's not quite so thick. And we can look at some other types of things to graph. In box number 3, I might want to graph another equation. And so I can add multiple equations to my graph. I'm going to make this one quadratic. So I'm going to use x squared, and then I might want to use -4. So my graph's starting to get a little cluttered looking here, but I do want to point out that when you graph multiple equations, Desmos will usually give you different colors so that they stand out. And again, if I want to change colors, I hold down on this circle, and maybe I want this to be blue. Now, as my graph is starting to look a little cluttered, I can turn off my plotted points and their label. And so now I just have the intersection of a line and a parabola. Graphing, Desmos graphs allow you to trace. So I'm going to go to this parabola with my cursor over here on the left, and I'm going to click on it, and a point appears. This is the location of this particular point where I've clicked. And this trace feature allows me to drag. So I can drag anywhere on this parabola I want and see the coordinates of the ordered pair right at that point. Now if I let go of my cursor, that disappears. So the trace is very temporary. I can trace also on the orange graph, and you can see also the location of an ordered pair at that particular spot. Now when we have multiple graphs, points of intersection are considered key points. You'll see kind of a little gray dot here and a gray dot up here. I can click on those, and those, because they're key points, will kind of stay there. So there's my 2 intersecting points. And additionally, if your graph has intercepts, x or y intercepts, those will also appear. So I can click right here. There's a y-intercept. Here's an x-intercept. And this x-intercept, there we go. So I have quite a few intercepts also graphed by clicking on them. Now, if I click over here on the left, out of that graph, they disappear, but I can always bring them back by re-clicking on those points. Now, continuing forward, we also can graph, besides equations, functions, which are basically equations using different notation. So typically in middle school and high school, we use f of x, but you could use any letter you'd like whatsoever. And I'm going to say f of x equals, and maybe I want to graph something that's cubic. So I could graph x to the power of 3 minus 5. And you'll see an additional graph appear here. Now this one is blue like the previous one, so I want those to be different. I can hold down here, maybe I make this one red. And again, any intersecting points or any intercepts I can click on, and those will appear. So function notation as well as equation notation work. Now, as my graph starts to again get a little cluttered, I'm going to show you some different things, but if I have multiple things to get rid of, rather than clicking the X each time, I can go to this little gear here. I can edit my list, and I can choose to delete them here, or I can delete all. So I'm going to delete all to go back to a blank canvas. And we can graph inequalities as well. I can graph y less than 3x plus 4. And Desmos will graph with the shading. Now over here on this graph canvas, if I put my cursor anywhere on the screen, I can move my screen by clicking and holding. So I can get a different viewing window just by moving this around. Well, in terms of viewing window, I can also adjust over here. Now right below that wrench, you see a plus sign. It says zoom in, minus sign says zoom out. And those are exactly as they sound. You can zoom in and out and your graph will adjust. If you want to go back to your original viewing window, that's this home screen, the default viewport it's called, and there's where we started. If you want to make very specific viewport settings or viewing window settings, you can go to this wrench again. Next to x-axis, below that, you'll see -10 and +10. Those are the minimum and maximum values for the viewport right now, for the viewing window. I can make this very specific. I can make that go from -2 to 18. And my viewing window or viewport will adjust accordingly. And notice to the right, it says step. Right now, my increments are in 2, but I could put step 1, and I can see increments of 1 on my x-axis as well as my y-axis. Some other features here, you can add a label to your y-axis or your x-axis if you're doing an authentic task for students. And you can also turn on and off the minor grid lines, which does that. That's on, that's off. You can turn off the grid completely, and the students will see just a coordinate plane. So I'm going to click out of this and click the home button again, and now we're back here with no grid whatsoever. I can graph a second inequality. Now if I want to do an inequality with an equal sign, Desmos recognizes that as well. Maybe I want to have y greater than or equal to. Well, I use my greater than symbol, which is on my keyboard. I can also find it down here in this drop-down keyboard. And if I want equals with it, I just simply type an equal sign right after the greater than, and it pops it underneath the inequality. It recognizes you want greater than or equal to. So maybe I want a slope of -2x plus 1. And I will then see a second inequality graphed here. And you can talk with students about overlapping shaded regions, etc. Points of intersection will appear. You can click on intercepts as well. And all of that functions as it did before. Besides graphing inequalities, we can add some other things to our canvas and our expression list. I'm going to get rid of my 2 equalities there, so I'm back to the beginning. And I can add other things with this plus symbol up here. I'm going to hover, and it says Add Item. So I'm going to click here. Here are the things I can add. Well, the first one is f of x expression. That's what we were just doing. If you want to type in equations, functions, ordered pairs, if you want to evaluate something, that's what you're going to use. You can also add a note. A note, when you add it, you get on the left here, it's not that graph circle, it's a quotation mark. That means here's where you can give directions for students. So if you wanted to give them directions to graph a line with a slope of 3, they could do that, and students then could type in here, graph a line with a slope of 3. Other things you can add in besides notes. The third one down says table. You can add a table. And this comes in, the default setting gives your x values a subscript. So you can't just use plain old x and y, you have to use subscripts with them. So as I were to, if I start filling in a table, 0, 0, immediately when I have an x and y coordinate that's valid, it appears over here on the graph canvas. So I'm just adding a few random points here. and you can see them being graphed. And if I need to adjust my canvas a little bit, I'm doing that with my mouse. So we can see here, and these points are clickable. So students can see the graphical representation of those plotted points from the table. This red circle here, if I hold down on it, gives me that same style menu. I can change colors, I can change thickness of the points, I can change the opacity, I can make them open circles or X's, and I can also drag this button over here to create a line segment between those points, and that line segment can be dashed or dotted. And that line also has some style options. I'm going to take the line off and just leave the table points plotted as they are. So I've got 4 points here. If I want to create well, let me add one more point here. After 3, 6, I might want to graph 50, 100. Now, as soon as I type that in, I don't see it appear over here. That's because it's outside of my viewport or my viewing window. No worries. Tables also come with a zoom fit function. So if I click on zoom fit, automatically my screen will zoom out to include all of the points in the table. So that's a nice little feature there. If I want to go back, I can press home, and that's where I am again. Zoom fit shows me all of the individual points. I can add a second table. So I could go back here and click this plus sign, but Desmos is also intuitive. It recognizes certain words. So if I want to type, I can type in the word table, and I have T-A-B-L. As soon as I hit the E, it recognizes, oh, you must want another table. And it'll give me the format for a second table, this time with subscripts 2 for X and Y. And so we can add, and I'm just going to randomly pick some numbers here. And these won't be linear. And again, I can press zoom fit right here, and I can see all of the points from the black graph in the table here. If I want to see all of the points in the red, I click this zoom fit, and now I can see all of those. Additionally, tables can appear from equations. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I want to turn off this table with the black plotted points by clicking here. That turns off those points. The table's still here, and the same with the red. So now I see nothing over here. In box number 4, I'm going to add an equation, and we can see that graphed in blue. A nice feature is I can convert this to table values for analysis with you and your students. So I can go up here to my gear, edit list, and next to this equation here, I have this little table feature. This will create a table right below that matches that equation, and it will populate that table with X values from -2 to 2, and it will give the corresponding Y values from that equation. I mean, that's pretty nifty right there. So that table will allow us to explore, by clicking on these points, the relationship between the X's and the Y's, and I can use zoom fit so I see all of them. And so this is a nice feature for discussing this idea with students, having this table appear. In terms of other cool features we can incorporate with tables, we can also use functions in tables. Now again, I've got quite a few things here. I got 5 boxes in my expression list. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of them. And I'm going to start out by graphing a function again. I'm going to graph 3x squared plus 5x minus 2, just a random parabola. And you can see it plotted here. Well, I can't convert that to a table. Oh, yes, I can convert it to a table. So here's my table values. But another thing I can do, if I don't want to convert it that way, is I can add a table And instead of y sub 1, I can replace that with f of x sub 1. Now to get x sub 1, anytime you type a letter, any number after it immediately becomes a subscript, so I don't have to use an underscore key or anything. But I can fill in values now in my table. Oops, I'm going to do 2, 3. And you can see as I add them, the table evaluates the function at those particular x values. And the points appear over here on the right hand side, and I can click zoom fit again, and here they all are. And my viewport will adjust to account for that. And I can click on all of these, and you can discuss with students the significance of 598 that comes from this table, etc., etc. And to finish up this first video, I want to show you a couple more things we can add over here on the left-hand side. I'm going to delete everything I have in here now, so I have a blank canvas again. And below table, you'll see folder. I can add a folder. I can give my folder a name. And if I have multiple equations, functions, ordered pairs, etc., I can put them in a folder to organize myself a little bit. So if I had, for example, an ordered pair 2, 3 that I wanted in blue, and I have another ordered pair that I want a different color, now imagine that this continues and I have multiple lines here. Well, this takes up a lot of space. Well, if I don't want that space taken up, what I can do is put these 3 ordered pairs in my folder by dragging them towards the folder. Now it's very subtle. Watch my cursor here on the left. As I move left, my cursor changes to what looks like a coordinate plane, an x-axis and a y-axis. That means this is movable. So I can move this. I could shift its location lower or higher. Now as I shift it higher towards the folder, watch just above to the right, you'll see a thin gray line appear connected to that triangle next to the here is my folder. When that thin gray line appears, that means this box is connected to the folder. It's in the folder now. And I can do that with each of my ordered pairs. I have to get my crosshairs here, or my coordinate plane, and when I drag it towards the folder and I see it connected with a thin gray line, that means I've put it in the folder. So right now I'm going to put my third one in the folder, and here's what's nice about folders. You can collapse them. So this folder contains different things, but it doesn't clutter up my expression list over here. And you'll see the next box down is box number 5, because boxes 2, 3, and 4 are really inside the folder. If I want to take something out of a folder, I again move my cursor here and I drag it away from the folder till that thin gray line disappears. And now this point is not part of my folder. And here's what my expression list looks like now. And I can move this to that spot if I want. And if I want it in the folder, I connect it with a thin gray line. So besides folders, some other items to add here. You can add images. Now an image has to be something that you have already downloaded and saved. So I've created a folder of images I use in my Desmos graphs and activities, and maybe I want to use an image of a Bitmoji. I can click on that, open it, and it will appear here and it will graphically display on your graph. Now that's a pretty big image. No worries. I can click on it and I can resize it and relocate it. If I want to resize it in proportion, I put my cursor up here and I drag a corner up or down, and that resizes it. And if I want to relocate it, I move my ordered pair, or I move my cursor to the center, and now I can relocate it. And as I relocate it, watch what changes over here. My center is an ordered pair, and so that's constantly dynamically changing. When I resize, watch the width and the height. Those also change as well. So you can manually change those, or you can do the dragging here with these points. In terms of the image, the angle, it has no rotation on it. If I wanted to rotate it, I can do that as well. This is in radians again. So we mostly think of rotations in degrees. Well, a 90-degree rotation would be pi over 2. I can replace the 0, and to get pi, I just simply type pi divided by 2. And now my image has rotated that amount. The opacity is same as before. If I want this very light in the background, I can make it 0.3, and you'll see this image becomes very faint. So I can add multiple images as well, and if you want to add multiple images and drag them into a folder, you have that option as well. I'm going to put this back with no rotation. And now, at this point, we're going to end this first video after 30 minutes. And what I want to talk to you about quickly is, how do we save something? Well, you see a save button right at the top here. If you want to use this again, or think you even might want to use it again, use save. If you click save, you'll be prompted to enter a title for this. So I might call this intro graph. You can call it whatever you want and click save. The title will appear up here. It'll tell you it's saved, and you can access it again later by going to the open graph symbol here. Some people call this the hamburger symbol, 3 horizontal lines. These are different things you can load that you've saved. So your most recent one, there's the recent one I did, and it is saved less than a minute ago. I can access any of these again. So if you wish to load something, you can do that as well after it has been saved. Also, you can share these graphs with students. So I'm going to take you over here to the upper right, and this is the share symbol. You can share this graph. I'm going to click on share graph. You can copy this URL and you can email it to kids. You can post it in Google Classroom or Schoology or any other LMS that you have. You can actually print this out. You can export it as an image. You can embed it in a website. Those are all options available to you to share this particular graph or task. So that's going to wrap up our first video, and we'll explore some other things in upcoming videos. Thanks.